A racist white man accuses a black delivery man of stealing packages from the neighborhood. The white man calls the police. However, he is shocked at what the police do when they arrive. Jamal Carter pulled his delivery truck to a stop on Maple Avenue. It was a quiet street, the kind where nothing much happened except the occasional bark of a dog or the sound of sprinklers watering the lawns. He had been assigned to this route just a few days ago, and so far, it had been uneventful, which was how he liked it. Stepping out of the truck, he adjusted his navy blue courier polo and grabbed the first package. The sun beat down as he walked across the street toward a modest brick house with a well-kept lawn. The package wasn't heavy, but the heat made his uniform stick to his back. Jamal didn't mind. He enjoyed the quiet work, the routine. He was here to do his job, drop off the packages, and move on. As Jamal placed the box neatly on the doorstep, he caught movement from the corner of his eye. Across the street, an older man stood on his porch watching him. Jamal recognized him. The guy had been sitting in the same spot the last time Jamal was here. Jamal gave a polite nod, a habit from dealing with homeowners, and turned back to his truck to grab the next delivery. "Hey, what are you doing?" The voice came sharp, cutting through the calm. Jamal turned to see the man standing at the edge of his porch now, his face tight with suspicion. "Just delivering a package, sir," Jamal replied, keeping his tone neutral. He wasn't new to this kind of reaction, especially when he worked new routes. People didn't like change, especially when that change didn't look like them. The man stepped closer, his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes darted between Jamal and the truck. "I've never seen you around here before." Jamal adjusted his baseball cap, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "I'm the new delivery driver for this area. Just started a few days ago." The man didn't move. "You sure you're not doing something else? I've been watching you. You've been snooping around." Jamal took a breath. He had been through this before, too many times. "Sir, I'm just delivering. You can see the uniform, the truck." He gestured to his courier van, the company's logo bright against the white paint. "I've got deliveries to make. If you've got a problem, maybe call the company." The man squinted, shaking his head. "That's what they all say." Jamal clenched his jaw but kept his voice even. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just doing my job." The man wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on Jamal's every move, as if waiting for something to happen. Jamal turned away, walking back to the truck, but he could feel the man's gaze burning into his back. He'd hoped the conversation would end there, but he knew it wouldn't. As he grabbed the next package from the truck, he noticed the man had moved closer, now standing near the curb. "You think people don't notice? We notice, we watch, and I've been watching you." Jamal stopped and turned, his patience wearing thin. "I'm just here to deliver packages. That's it. You expect me to believe that? You're probably taking them for yourself. You think nobody's paying attention?" Jamal stared at him for a moment, weighing his response. He could argue. He could try to explain again, but he knew this man had already made up his mind. Instead, he simply said, "Believe what you want. I've got a job to do." The man took another step forward, his voice rising. "We don't need thieves in this neighborhood." Jamal sighed and shook his head, turning back to the truck. The man wasn't worth the time, and there were more deliveries to make. As Jamal climbed back into the truck, he noticed a woman standing across the street, watching the scene unfold. She seemed hesitant, unsure whether to intervene, but for now, she stayed quiet. Jamal placed his hands on the wheel, exhaling slowly. He'd been through worse, and he'd get through this too. He just hoped the day wouldn't get any uglier. He started the engine, moving down the street to the next house, leaving the man still standing there, glaring at him from the curb. Jamal pulled his truck a little further down the street and stopped in front of the next house on his list. He could still feel the weight of the man's stare from down the block, but he tried to shake it off. Just another delivery, he told himself. He stepped out of the truck, grabbed a medium-sized box from the back, and headed toward the front door of a two-story house with white shutters. Halfway up the driveway, he heard the sound of footsteps pounding on the pavement behind him. "Hey, you think I'm just gonna let you keep going? You're not fooling anyone!" Jamal turned around to see the man from before storming down the street, his face red with anger. His hands were clenched into fists, his steps determined. Jamal sighed, stopping in his tracks. "Sir, I already told you. I'm just doing my job." The man pointed a finger at him, his voice louder now, almost shouting. "That's what they all say. You don't belong here. I've lived on this street for over 20 years, and I've never seen you before." Jamal set the package down carefully, his patience wearing thin. He glanced around, noticing more people starting to peek through their windows. A few doors had opened slightly, neighbors curious but hesitant to step outside. He saw the woman from earlier, standing by her front steps now, watching closely. "Look, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I'm the new delivery driver, like I told you before." Jamal kept his voice steady, though frustration gnawed at him. "If you've got a problem, maybe you can talk to the company. I don't need to talk to anyone. I know what's going on here." The man took another step closer, his finger still jabbing the air between them. You think you can just waltz in here and take what you want, but I'm not stupid. Jamal crossed his arms, keeping his ground. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before, but it didn't make it any easier. I'm not taking anything, just delivering packages. The woman who had been watching from across the street, Cynthia, finally stepped in. She walked across the lawn, her face set in determination. Paul, what are you doing? He's clearly the delivery driver. Look at the uniform. Look at the truck. Paul whipped around to face her, his expression fierce. Stay out of this, Cynthia. I'm protecting the neighborhood. Cynthia stopped a few feet away, arms folded. Protecting it from what, exactly? A man doing his job? Paul pointed back at Jamal, his voice dripping with accusation. From him. I've been watching him. He's up to no good. Cynthia rolled her eyes. Paul, you're embarrassing yourself. He's wearing a uniform, for crying out loud. Do you really think a thief would show up in a marked truck in broad daylight with a uniform on? Paul turned back to Jamal, ignoring Cynthia's words. I don't care what kind of outfit he's wearing. He doesn't belong here. Jamal clenched his fists, but kept them by his sides. His voice was tight now. I've got a job to do, and I'm going to keep doing it. I'm not here to prove anything to you. Paul's face twisted with anger. You think you can talk to me like that? I've been living here longer than you've been alive. This is my street. I'll decide who belongs here. Paul, enough! Cynthia's voice cut through the tension, her patience clearly wearing thin. He's just delivering packages. Let it go. Paul didn't budge. His eyes locked on Jamal. No, I'm not letting this go. I'm calling the police. Jamal closed his eyes briefly, taking a slow breath. This was the last thing he needed. He opened his mouth to speak, but Cynthia beat him to it. You're calling the police? For what? Because he's working? You've got to be kidding me. Paul ignored her, already pulling out his phone. You'll see. You'll all see. He jabbed at the screen, his voice lowering, but still loud enough for Jamal and Cynthia to hear. Yeah, I need the police out here. There's a suspicious guy on Maple Avenue, acting shady. I think he's stealing packages. Jamal didn't bother responding. He just shook his head, bending down to pick up the package he'd set aside earlier. He had a job to do, and this guy wasn't going to stop him. Cynthia stepped closer to Jamal. I'm sorry about this. Well, you can see what he's like. Jamal gave her a quick nod, his jaw tight. It's not your fault. I just need to finish my deliveries. Across the street, more neighbors had stepped out onto their porches, some whispering, others simply watching. Jamal could feel the eyes on him, a familiar, uncomfortable weight pressing down. He turned back to the house, placed the package on the doorstep, and walked back to his truck. Cynthia stayed with him, her presence a small comfort. You really don't have to deal with this, she said softly as they reached the truck. I'll talk to him. Jamal shook his head, climbing into the driver's seat. It's fine. I've been through worse. But Cynthia's expression showed she didn't think it was fine. Neither did Jamal, but there wasn't much either of them could do now. Paul stood on the sidewalk, glaring at Jamal with his phone still in hand, waiting for the police to arrive. As Jamal started the truck, he glanced once more at Cynthia. She gave him a small, apologetic nod. He returned the gesture and pulled away, his mind already racing ahead to what was coming next. Jamal drove down the street, trying to ignore the growing pit in his stomach. The tension from the confrontation with Paul lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. He had a few more houses left on his route, but the knowledge that Paul had called the police weighed heavily on him. He pulled up to the next house, methodically moving through his delivery routine. Get the package, walk to the door, drop it off, repeat. But he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him from every window, every corner of the neighborhood. Jamal placed the package on the porch of the next house, turning back to his truck when he heard it. A siren in the distance. His shoulders tensed. He knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up. As much as he wanted to believe the police would handle this fairly, he'd been through situations like this before. Things could go sideways quickly. He climbed back into the truck and started it, thinking maybe he could finish the last of his deliveries before they arrived. But as he pulled away from the curb, he spotted the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. A police car turned onto Maple Avenue, headed right for him. Jamal sighed. He wasn't going anywhere now. He parked the truck and stepped out, standing by the side of the vehicle as the police cruiser slowed to a stop behind him. The door swung open, and Officer Ryan Matthews, a tall man in his mid-30s, stepped out, adjusting his sunglasses as he approached. Afternoon, sir, Officer Matthews said, his tone neutral but cautious. We got a call about a possible theft in the area. Can I see some identification? Jamal nodded, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. Of course, officer. I'm the delivery driver for this route. Let me get my ID. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his company-issued ID badge, handing it over. Officer Matthews examined the badge, glancing between Jamal and the logo on the side of the truck. All right, just need to ask a few questions to clear things up. You understand, right? Jamal nodded again, his expression neutral. I do. I've got my paperwork in the truck if you need it. Before Officer Matthews could respond, Paul appeared from down the street, practically jogging toward them. His face was flushed, his breath short, but his expression was triumphant. There he is, Paul shouted, pointing at Jamal. That's the guy. I told you he's been snooping around stealing packages. Officer Matthews turned to Paul, raising an eyebrow. Sir, we're investigating. Let's not jump to conclusions. Paul shook his head vigorously. There's no jumping to conclusions. I've seen him. He's been taking packages. He doesn't belong here. Jamal crossed his arms, biting back the urge to respond. He'd been through this dance before, and he knew arguing wouldn't help. He just had to stay calm and let the officer do his job. Sir, Officer Matthews said, his voice steady as he turned back to Paul. We'll handle it. Please stand back while I finish talking to him. Paul's face darkened, but he stepped back a few paces, muttering under his breath. Jamal watched as the officer continued his investigation, checking Jamal's ID against a list he had on his phone. You got any paperwork to back this up? Officer Matthews asked. Jamal nodded, walking around to the side of the truck. Yes, sir. I've got my route sheet here. He pulled a clipboard from the front seat, offering it to the officer. You can see, this is my route for the day. These are the packages I've already delivered. Officer Matthews glanced over the clipboard, flipping through the papers, then nodded slowly. Looks like everything's in order. I'll just need to verify with the company. Jamal didn't say anything, just watched as the officer pulled out his phone and dialed the number for the courier company. A few tense minutes passed as Officer Matthews spoke with someone on the other end, confirming Jamal's identity and his role. Jamal glanced around while he waited. More neighbors had started to gather. Mrs. Gutierrez stood at her window, watching intently. Cynthia had come back out, standing on her front lawn, her arms crossed as she watched the scene unfold with clear disapproval. The whole street seemed to be holding its breath. Officer Matthews ended the call and nodded at Jamal. All right, Mr. Carter, everything checks out. You're free to go. Sorry for the inconvenience. Jamal offered a tight smile. Thanks, officer. I get it. You're just doing your job. But before Jamal could move, Paul stepped forward again, his voice rising in frustration. What do you mean he's free to go? He's a thief. I told you he doesn't belong here. Officer Matthews sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Sir, we've confirmed everything. He's the delivery driver for this route, and all his paperwork is in order. There's no crime here. Paul's face twisted in disbelief. You're just going to let him walk away? This is why this neighborhood's going downhill. Officer Matthews's patience seemed to be wearing thin. Sir, unless you have any evidence of wrongdoing, there's nothing more we can do. Now, I suggest you let this go before it becomes a bigger issue. Paul opened his mouth to argue, but before he could say anything, Cynthia stepped forward. Paul, that's enough. You're making a scene, and you're wrong. He's just doing his job. Paul turned on her, his voice seething. You stay out of this, Cynthia. This is about keeping our neighborhood safe. No, Paul, it's about you harassing someone who's just trying to work. Cynthia's voice was firm, unwavering. The officer just told you everything is fine. Let it go. For a moment, Paul seemed at a loss for words, his anger boiling over as he looked between Jamal, the officer, and Cynthia. But instead of responding, he took a step back, his face still twisted in fury. Officer Matthews gave Jamal a quick nod. You're good to go. Jamal climbed back into his truck, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He gave Cynthia a small nod of thanks before driving away, the police car's lights fading in his rearview mirror. As Jamal drove down Maple Avenue to finish his deliveries, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Jamal had just delivered another package, but his mind wasn't on his work. He was still thinking about the confrontation with Paul and the fact that the police had been called. The heat of the afternoon seemed to intensify as his frustration simmered. As much as he tried to focus on his route, the weight of what had happened sat heavy on him. 20 minutes later, the flashing lights returned, and Jamal's heart sank as the police cruiser pulled up again, parking behind his truck. He knew it was the same officer, and he hadn't even finished his route before they were back. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of his truck to face the situation head-on. Officer Ryan Matthews approached, looking just as cautious as before. He had his sunglasses on, but Jamal could feel the tension in his stance. Paul was trailing behind the officer, his face a mixture of smugness and triumph. He seemed sure that this time, the police would get it right. Afternoon again, Officer Matthews said, his voice calm but clipped. We got another call. Jamal stayed where he was, his hands at his sides, trying to remain as calm as possible. I'm just finishing my deliveries, officer. Same as before. Paul, standing a few feet behind the officer, couldn't hold back. He's lying. I've seen him snooping around these houses, taking things. I know what I saw. Jamal glanced at Paul but didn't respond. There was no point. This wasn't about packages anymore. It was about control. Paul didn't like that Jamal was here. And that was the whole problem. Jamal kept his eyes on the officer. You've already verified everything. My ID, my paperwork, I'm just trying to do my job. Officer Matthews nodded slightly. But Paul wasn't done. I've been watching him, Paul insisted, his voice rising. He doesn't belong here and you're just going to let him keep walking around, doing whatever he wants? Jamal tensed at Paul's words. It was clear now what Paul really meant. He didn't belong here because of how he looked. Jamal kept his expression neutral, even though he felt anger bubbling beneath the surface. Officer Matthews glanced back at Paul, a hint of impatience creeping into his tone. Sir, we already checked everything. He's the delivery driver for this route. He's not taking anything that doesn't belong to him. Paul stepped forward, his voice loud and accusing. So you're just going to take his word for it? You think I'm making this up? Before Officer Matthews could respond, another voice cut through the air. That's exactly what you're doing, Paul. Cynthia stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, her expression hard. She had been watching the whole time and had clearly had enough. She took a few steps forward, standing closer to Jamal now. You've been harassing him for no reason, Cynthia said, her voice sharp. He's doing his job, and you're making a fool of yourself. Paul turned toward her, his face red with anger. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm trying to protect the neighborhood. Cynthia shook her head. From what? A man delivering packages? You're paranoid, and you're acting like a bully. Paul's eyes narrowed. You're on his side? Cynthia didn't flinch. I'm on the side of common sense. He's wearing a uniform. He's driving a marked truck. What else do you need to believe him? Paul opened his mouth to respond, but Officer Matthews cut him off, his patience clearly wearing thin. All right, that's enough. The officer turned fully to Paul now, his tone firmer. We've already verified everything. There's no crime here. If you keep harassing him, you're the one we're going to have to deal with. Paul's face twisted with frustration, but the officer wasn't done. Sir, if you have a real issue, you can take it up with the company. But right now you're wasting our time, and this needs to stop. For a moment, there was silence. Paul looked from the officer to Cynthia and then back to Jamal. His face was red, and his mouth tightened into a thin line. He looked like he wanted to say more, to keep pushing, but there was no one left to support him. Mrs. Gutierrez, who had been watching from her window again, stepped outside cautiously, her eyes on Paul. She said nothing, but the silent support was clear. Other neighbors had gathered too, watching, waiting to see what Paul would do. Jamal stood still, not speaking. He didn't need to. The officer and Cynthia had said everything that needed to be said. He had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let Paul stop him. Finally, Paul turned away, muttering under his breath. This isn't over, he grumbled, storming back toward his house. But his voice lacked the strength it had before. He was angry, but it was clear that he'd lost this round. Officer Matthews gave Jamal a nod. You're good to go. Sorry about all this. Jamal nodded in return. Thanks, officer. I appreciate you handling it. Cynthia gave Jamal a small smile, though her expression was still tight with frustration. I'm sorry you had to go through this. Again, Jamal shrugged slightly, his weariness showing. It's not the first time. Officer Matthews glanced back toward Paul's house where the man had disappeared. If there's any more trouble, let us know, but I don't think you'll be hearing from him again today. Jamal wasn't so sure about that, but he didn't say it out loud. Thanks, officer. I'll finish up my route and be out of here soon. The officer gave him one last nod before walking back to his car, the tension finally starting to ease. Cynthia watched him go, then turned back to Jamal. If he gives you any more trouble, let me know, she said. He doesn't speak for everyone on this street. Jamal smiled slightly. I appreciate it, Cynthia. Really. With that, Cynthia walked back to her house, and Jamal climbed back into his truck. The neighborhood seemed to settle back into its usual quiet, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Paul might have backed down for now, but something told him the man wasn't done yet. Still, Jamal had a job to do. He pulled the truck into gear and drove to the next house, hoping that this time he'd be able to finish his deliveries in peace. Jamal drove a few more houses down Maple Avenue, trying to push the events of the last hour out of his mind. He knew the routine. These kinds of confrontations didn't just vanish. Even if Paul had stormed off, angry and humiliated, the neighborhood had been watching, and that kind of public spectacle didn't fade quickly. He pulled the delivery truck to a stop in front of a modest, single-story home with a bright red door. His eyes scanned the street, noticing how quiet it had become. The curtains that had once fluttered with nosy neighbors peeking out were still again. But he knew people were watching. He could feel it. Jamal stepped out of the truck, grabbing another package from the back. His steps were slower this time, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He just wanted to finish up and get out of this neighborhood. He was tired of the stares, the accusations, and the constant need to prove he belonged somewhere. As he reached the front door, placing the package carefully on the porch, he heard footsteps approaching. His body tensed automatically, his mind flashing back to Paul's angry face. But this time, it was Cynthia. She stood at the bottom of the driveway, her arms crossed, watching him with a look of quiet apology. "Hey," she said softly. "How's it going?" Jamal gave her a tired smile. "Just trying to finish up. Almost done." Cynthia nodded, taking a few steps closer. "Look, I'm really sorry about what happened earlier. Paul, he's always been like that. But today, he went way too far." Jamal shrugged, trying to keep his frustration in check. "It's not the first time I've dealt with something like this. Won't be the last." Cynthia frowned, her brow furrowing in concern. "I hate that you have to deal with this at all. He's making the whole neighborhood look bad." Jamal shook his head. "It's not about the neighborhood. It's about people like him thinking they have the right to decide who belongs." Cynthia let out a sigh. "You're right. He thinks he's the gatekeeper of this street. It's ridiculous." Jamal nodded. "Yeah, but at least the officer handled it. I just want to finish up and get out of here." Cynthia glanced over her shoulder, looking down the street in the direction of Paul's house. "You probably won't hear from him again today. He's embarrassed, but knowing him, he's going to stew about this for a while." Jamal didn't need to be told that. He could already feel the lingering tension in the air. Paul had lost today, but there was a sense that he wasn't finished yet. "I'll be fine," Jamal said, though the weariness in his voice was hard to hide. "I just want to get home." Cynthia offered a sympathetic smile. "I get it. Just know that not everyone on this street is like him. You've got people here who've got your back." Jamal appreciated the sentiment, but he also knew that words weren't always enough. Paul's actions had already left a mark, and the looks from the neighbors didn't exactly scream solidarity. He thanked Cynthia anyway. "Thanks, Cynthia. That means a lot." She nodded, giving him a quick wave before turning to walk back to her house. Jamal watched her go, then returned to his truck. He placed his hands on the steering wheel, staring out at the street for a moment. It was strange how quiet everything seemed now, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Jamal started the truck, pulling it forward to the next house. He was down to just a few more stops, and he could feel the weight of the day pressing down on him harder with each delivery. As he approached the next house, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Mrs. Gutierrez was standing on her front porch now, a watering can in her hand. She gave him a small nod, an unspoken gesture of support. Jamal returned the nod, grateful for the quiet acknowledgement. The rest of his deliveries passed without incident, but Jamal remained on edge. He knew better than to think it was over just because Paul had retreated to his house. There was a tension in the air, something unresolved. He had been through this enough times to know that these situations rarely ended cleanly. When Jamal finished the last delivery, he felt a brief moment of relief. He was ready to leave the neighborhood and shake off the stress of the day. He climbed into the truck, closed the door behind him, and sat for a moment, letting the engine idle. Then, just as he was about to pull away, he saw it. Paul. He was standing at the end of his driveway, arms crossed, staring at Jamal's truck. His face was hard, set with determination. Jamal's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He hadn't expected Paul to come out again so soon. Paul's eyes locked onto Jamal's as if daring him to leave. Jamal hesitated, unsure of what Paul was planning. The sense of relief he'd felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. And then, before Jamal could react, Paul made his move. He stepped off the curb and marched toward Jamal's truck, walking straight into the street. Jamal's stomach twisted as Paul positioned himself right in front of the truck, blocking its path. Jamal sat in the truck, staring at Paul standing in the middle of the street. The man's body was stiff, his expression a mix of anger and twisted satisfaction. It was like he had been waiting for this moment, waiting to assert control over a situation that was already out of hand. Jamal's pulse quickened, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. He thought he had moved past this, that Paul's antics would be over after the police left. But here he was, making it clear that he wasn't backing down. For a moment, Jamal considered calling the police again, but something in him told him it would only escalate the situation. Paul wanted attention, and the last thing Jamal wanted was to give him more fuel for his misplaced anger. He took a breath, opened the truck door, and stepped out. Paul's face lit up as Jamal approached, like he had already won some silent battle. "You thought you could just drive off, huh?" Paul sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Not this time. I'm not letting you go until they arrest you. I've called the police again. This time, they'll do their job right." Jamal didn't respond at first. He just looked at Paul, sizing him up. The man was older, shorter than Jamal, but his stance was rigid, defiant. Jamal could see that Paul wasn't thinking rationally anymore. if he ever had been. This wasn't about packages, about theft, or even about the police. It was about power. Paul was determined to prove that he could control who came in and out of his neighborhood. "Look," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm, "you need to move out of the way. I've done nothing wrong. The police already checked everything. This is harassment, and it's only going to get worse for you if you keep this up." Paul crossed his arms, his chest puffing out as if he'd just been issued a challenge. "I don't care what they said last time. You think I'm going to let you wander around here like you own the place? You're just waiting for the right moment, and I'm not giving you that chance." Jamal clenched his jaw, feeling the tension rise. He could see neighbors peeking out from their windows again, some of them stepping out onto their porches to watch the scene unfold. His mind flashed back to Cynthia's words. He's embarrassed, but this didn't feel like embarrassment. This felt like desperation. "Paul!" came a voice from down the street. Cynthia once again was standing on her front lawn, her arms crossed, her voice loud and cutting through the tension. "Move! You're embarrassing yourself." Paul ignored her, keeping his eyes locked on Jamal. "I'm protecting my neighborhood." "From what?" Cynthia shot back. "From a man doing his job? The police already told you there's nothing wrong. What are you doing? You're making a scene again." Paul turned toward her, his face flushed with frustration. "Stay out of this, Cynthia. This is none of your business." "It became my business the second you decided to harass someone for no reason," Cynthia said, her voice sharp. "And you've dragged the whole street into it." Jamal didn't want to argue anymore. He'd had enough of this. Enough of trying to reason with a man who didn't seem capable of understanding reason. His patience was running out, and all he wanted was to finish his day and get out of this place. "Paul, move," Jamal said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not doing this with you anymore." For a moment, Paul seemed to hesitate. His bravado faltered just slightly, but then he regained his composure. "I'm not moving. You can call the police again, but they're coming anyway. This time I'll make sure they don't just let you go." Jamal felt the frustration reach a boiling point, but before he could respond, Mrs. Gutierrez appeared at the edge of her driveway, watering can in hand. "Paul, enough already," she called out, her voice weary but strong. "We're all tired of this. Let him do his job." Paul shot her a venomous look, but before he could say anything, the distant wail of sirens echoed through the street again. Jamal glanced in the direction of the sound, watching as the police cruiser turned the corner, heading toward them for the second time that day. The tension in the air thickened as the car came to a stop. Officer Matthews stepped out again, his expression less patient this time. He walked toward Jamal and Paul, glancing between them as if he could already tell what was going on. "What's the situation this time?" Officer Matthews asked, his voice flat. Paul didn't waste a second. "He's still here, officer. He's been sneaking around, and I'm telling you, he's up to something. I'm just trying to protect my neighborhood." Officer Matthews sighed, clearly tired of this already. He turned to Jamal, his expression apologetic. "Anything new?" Jamal shook his head. "I'm just trying to finish my deliveries. He's blocking my truck." Officer Matthews nodded, then turned to Paul. "Sir, we've been through this already. Everything checked out. He's just delivering packages." Paul's face turned red, his voice rising. "You're not listening to me. I've been watching him. He's waiting for the right moment to—" "Sir, that's enough," Officer Matthews interrupted, his tone sharper now. "You've called us out here 3 times for no reason. There's nothing suspicious going on, and I'm not going to waste any more time on this." Paul's face twisted in disbelief. "You're just going to let him keep going? What kind of cop are you?" Officer Matthews took a step forward, his hand on his hip. "Sir, if you don't step aside and stop harassing this man, we're going to have a different problem. You're wasting police resources, and I can issue you a citation for that. Is that what you want?" Paul's bravado finally cracked. He stood there, mouth open, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. For a moment, it looked like he might argue again, but the weight of the officer's words seemed to finally sink in. Paul took a step back, his arms falling to his sides. He glared at Jamal, then at Officer Matthews, but he didn't say another word. Slowly, he turned and walked back toward his house, muttering to himself. The tension in the air seemed to break as Paul disappeared inside. Officer Matthews sighed and turned back to Jamal. "Sorry about that, Mr. Carter. You're good to go." Jamal nodded, grateful but exhausted. "Thanks, officer." Officer Matthews gave him a tired smile. "Just let us know if there's any more trouble." With that, the officer returned to his cruiser and drove off, leaving Jamal standing by his truck. The neighbors who had gathered to watch slowly started to retreat back into their homes, but Cynthia and Mrs. Gutierrez remained, standing quietly by their houses. Jamal looked toward them, offering a small nod of appreciation. Cynthia gave him a wave, her expression one of both relief and sympathy. Mrs. Gutierrez simply smiled, lifting her watering can slightly in a silent gesture of support. Jamal climbed back into his truck, starting the engine. The day wasn't over yet, but at least now, he could finally get back to his route without the weight of Paul's accusations hanging over him. As he pulled away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of exhaustion, not just from the day, but from the constant battle he had to fight just to do his job. It wasn't over. People like Paul rarely gave up so easily. But for today at least, it was. Jamal gripped the steering wheel tightly as he finally pulled away from Maple Avenue. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, watching the houses shrink behind him. The tension in his chest began to ease as he left the neighborhood. But his mind was still buzzing with everything that had happened. The road stretched out before him, but his thoughts were stuck in a loop. Paul's accusations, his arrogance, and that simmering rage that never seemed to leave the man's face. It wasn't new to Jamal. He had seen that look before, heard those same words, "You don't belong here, someone like you." They were thinly veiled, but clear as day. Paul wasn't afraid of him because of the packages. Paul was afraid of what Jamal represented. To Paul, Jamal was a threat, simply because of the color of his skin. Jamal exhaled slowly, trying to shake the day off. But it wasn't easy. It never was. He had dealt with people like Paul before. People who didn't need a reason to dislike him, who had already made up their minds long before they saw him. In Paul's eyes, Jamal was always guilty, no matter how clean his record was, no matter how hard he worked. The uniform, the truck, the ID, none of it mattered to someone like Paul. "He's a racist," Jamal muttered to himself, feeling the truth of it settle deep in his chest, plain and simple. But as much as Paul's actions had gotten under his skin, Jamal couldn't let the whole day be defined by one man's hatred. It wasn't just Paul on that street. He thought of Cynthia, standing firm in the middle of all that tension, calling Paul out when no one else would, and Mrs. Gutierrez, who didn't have to say much but showed her support in small, quiet ways. Cynthia had stood by him, a complete stranger, and defended him when she didn't have to. She didn't wait to see how things would play out. She stepped up immediately, not just once, but every time Paul escalated. Jamal had dealt with people who looked the other way, who didn't want to get involved, but Cynthia wasn't one of them. There's goodness in some people, Jamal thought, glancing at the road ahead as the city's skyline started to appear in the distance. Not everyone's like Paul. He remembered the way Cynthia had looked at Paul, disgusted by his actions, unwilling to let him get away with it. She didn't have to come out of her house and say anything. She could have stayed inside like so many others did, watched from the sidelines, and pretended it wasn't her problem. But she hadn't. "People like her. They make a difference," Jamal whispered, feeling a small sense of relief wash over him. For all the Pauls in the world, there were also Cynthias, people who weren't afraid to stand up when it mattered. And as much as the day had worn him down, that was something worth holding on to. Jamal knew he couldn't change people like Paul, but it was the Cynthias of the world who reminded him that change was possible. As the traffic lights flickered overhead and the city streets grew busier, Jamal felt the weight of the day begin to lift, if only a little. He wasn't naive. He knew there would be more Pauls in his future, more moments like today. But there was strength in knowing that he wasn't alone, that there were people who saw through the hate and were willing to fight against it. Jamal turned the corner onto his street, his mind finally beginning to quiet. Home was close now, and with it, the comfort of his family. He'd tell his wife about what happened today, maybe shake his head at the absurdity of it all. But deep down, he'd remember Cynthia's voice, clear and strong, cutting through the noise. Goodness wasn't always loud, but it was there. And as long as people like Cynthia existed, Jamal knew that days like this, no matter how exhausting, would never have the final word. He pulled into his driveway, letting out a long breath as he parked the truck. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the neighborhood. Jamal stared at the fading light for a moment, letting the day slip away. With one last deep breath, he stepped out of the truck and walked toward the front door, ready to leave Paul and Maple Avenue behind, at least for tonight.